everyone. I'd like to call the Board of Finance Budget Workshop meeting to order. If you could all please stand and join me in the pledge of allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd just like to let everybody know that Houston Putnam Lowry is actually here. Oh. He is calling in.
I am here.
Okay, so as everyone knows, this is also called the July Board meeting. We have a lot of folks here this evening. The audience is a little thin. Maybe there are folks watching online due to the weather, so welcome to everyone. I just want to start with thanks. Thanks to Christine Pescator, our board secretary, Glenn Bruve, and the library staff for setting up the room, and all those here in the room and others who have worked diligently and thoughtfully for months to prepare the proposed budget. I want to thank Town Manager Brandon Robertson, Assistant Town Manager Grace Tiesi, Finance Director Tom Stasio, Jennifer Worsman, Executive Secretary in the Town Manager's Office, Superintendent Escom Carnamola, who's here today, School Finance Director Susan Russo, also here, Deb Shute, Chair, and the members of the Board of Education, Dan Bohamis, Chair, and the members of the Town Council, and of course all my fellow members on the Board of Finance. Tonight the Board will discuss and then vote to adopt the budget that will be presented at the annual meeting on the budget on Monday, to be held on Monday, May 6th at 7 p.m. Following the annual town meeting, town residents will have the opportunity to vote yes or no on the adoption of the budget at the town-wide budget referendum that will be held at the Senior Center on Wednesday, May 15th during normal polling hours of 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. Typically, the Board of Finance sets the new mill rate for real estate on the evening of the budget referendum. Note that per the Avon charter, if fewer than 9% of the registered voters of Avon turn out to vote on the budget, it is deemed accepted. For the 2023 budget referendum, the no votes slightly exceeded the yes votes, but it did pass because we didn't meet the threshold. Turnout at the referendum has not met the 9% threshold since 2013. That's a short way of saying if you have anything to say, you better show up at the budget referendum. Budget for fiscal year 24-25 is based on the revaluation that was completed as of October 1, 2023 assessment date. The revaluation resulted in 19% grand list growth year over year, with the assessed values of residential properties going up. Due to the significant growth in the grand list, the mill rate will be lower than the prior year. Prior to determining the revenue needs for the current year, the base mill rate was lowered to 29.27 mils from the previous mill rate of 35.39 to reflect the change in the grand list attributable to revaluation. To generate the revenue required to fund the proposed budget, the Town Council approved an increase from the base mill rate from 29.27 mils to 30.34 mils. Total revenue that is required to fund the budget is $5,991. Now that's the grand list, I believe. $432. That is the grand list, right? I got that wrong. Anyway, as such, the proposed budget calls for a tax increase of 3.3%. The members of the Board of Finance have the unenviable task of coming in at the end of the budget process to consider what changes to make to the budget. And just briefly, to put the 3.3% 3.0 increase in context, I just wanted to share some other facts to consider. The rate of growth of the Connecticut economy during 2023, on March 29th, the Federal Bureau of Economic Analysis reported that Connecticut's real gross domestic product grew 3.1% for the last quarter of 2023. The end of the quarter growth was higher than Connecticut's GDP for most of 2023, which grew at a rate of 2.1%, behind the national average of 2.5%. Last year's percentage of tax increase was 2.26%. So on a straight comparison basis, which may not be entirely fair, it exceeded the rate of growth. This year's increase is also larger than the most recent rate of growth, but not by much. So I would just like to ask to hear members' thoughts about lowering the percentage of the tax increase to less than the rate of growth. So that would be from 3.3 to 3.0%, if possible, with the assumption being that tax increases should not outpace growth or earnings. My suggestion is that we consider tweaking the increase. I am not in favor of cutting staff or programs. So perhaps members can share ideas about addressing the use of revenues on hand or revenue assumptions that may allow us to lower the percentage of the tax increase. And I should ask the town manager if you've identified any non-tax revenues to put back into the budget.
There's a longer answer to that. So there is one adjustment that we have to make, and as you rightly pointed out, we've just gone through a revaluation process that's effective on the 2023 grant list. And once the notices for those reassessments go out, taxpayers have a number of options to appeal their assessment, and that's a long process. And we are putting our budget together and distributing that budget before that process has concluded. So we have to pick a grand list and use that grand list to build the budget that then results in the mill rate that generates the levy to support the proposal. So since we've proposed that budget, the Board of Assessment Appeals has completed their work. They've made several reductions based on assessment appeals from taxpayers, and that's resulted in a reduction to the grand list of about $2.8 million. That's important because the mill rate of 30.34 that you mentioned before is based on a slightly larger grand list. So what we have is a situation where the revenues are expenditures are somewhat out of balance because a 30.34 mill rate doesn't drive the levy necessary to support the proposed budget. So the bottom line is that Tom and I looked over the non-tax revenue line items, and I'm comfortable recommending that we adjust interest income by about $87,911. And that's the amount that you need to compensate for the reduction in the grand list. So by having that slight increase in interest income, you keep the proposed mill rate at 30.34. There are no other adjustments to non-tax revenues we're comfortable with at this point. As you probably recall, last year, we recommended and the board approved a very significant increase in intergovernmental revenues. It was something on the order of $850,000. And whenever you do look at the interest income line item, which we've talked a little bit about over this past year, very volatile looking back, and certainly it's going to be volatile going forward. I think in the current year, we budgeted $350,000. We recommended in the proposed budget $1 million for interest income, and now we're just recommending increasing that by $87,911. So that's the only adjustment we had at this time.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I've never had a really good way of asking, hi everyone.
Hi.
How to go about starting this. But would anyone want to volunteer to go first, or?
Sure.
You got two volunteers, so.
I don't care. Either way, I can sort of follow your comments, Kathy. Mine are somewhat aligned.
All right, so why don't we let Brian go first and then Harry. Thank you.
Go down the line, so thank you. So a lot of time and thoughtful consideration was put into this budget, and I commend all those who contributed. Additionally, Brandon's foresight to increase the unallocated policy to 15% is extremely prudent, so want to acknowledge that. I don't think the operating budgets for the town or the Board of Education are the issues per se for this fiscal year, but I do think the capital projects currently being contemplated by the town council in the coming years will present some challenges down the road for the residents of Avon. With new capital comes increased expenses. In the coming years, if it is the town council's desire to move full steam ahead with the sizable capital initiatives, I think we'll be left with little wiggle room during the annual budget appropriation process. To that end, I'd be more comfortable voting for a tax increase that is more closely aligned with the historical averages than the current one put forth, which contemplates a 5.44% spending increase and a 3.3% tax increase. Historical averages over 10 and 20 years for spending are 3.03 and 3.55% respectively, and this year we're at 5.44%, which is quite a bit above the historical norms. Granted, inflation has reared its ugly head over the past year, and we're all paying more for a lot of items, but I'd argue that because of this is precisely why we need to be more fiscally conservative now. Revenue comes from only two sources: taxes and assessments and non-property tax sources, with the percentage allocation between the two sources at roughly 85-15. I'd argue that one component of non-property tax sources declines, the investment income, which it is surely to do in the next year or so given the current interest rate environment and inverted yield curve, that the residents will have to pick up the shortfall in the form of property tax increases and assessments, where we can hope for larger intergovernmental sources like grants, but hope is not a great strategy. The town currently has a significant favorable budget variance in other local revenues due to the interest rate environment, and let's not use that as a cushion to simply prop up spending. With all the above points in mind, I'd like to see a reduction in the additional funding needed of about $250,000, which would bring our tax increase down to 3.04%. It's not a break-the-bank reduction, but I do recognize difficult decisions would have to be made on the expense side of the equation.
Thank you, Brian.
Okay, so along those lines that Brian brought up, the other local revenues. So currently, we're 1.75 million over what was budgeted. On an annualized basis, that's $2.6 million. Obviously, we don't have a crystal ball of what's going to happen with that. But I'd like to see that somehow brought into play, maybe in a similar way we did with the money that was set aside for the pavement that's being brought into this year, this coming year, to help bring that rate increase down to about 3%. Because I really think that there are a lot of people in town who are going to be hit hard by this new assessment. Most notably, when you look at the grand list comparison that we were given showing the different categories of buildings that had increases, residential was at 24%, but condominiums were at 41%. And 1/4 of our population in Avon resides in condominiums. So you're going to have a significantly higher increase in their property taxes come July 1st. So if we can do anything to bring that down closer to 3, I would be in favor of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. Harry, you all set?
Yeah. I'd like to start with Brandon. If you could go over those numbers again in regards to interest income. Did I hear you say originally we were planning for interest income to be around $1 million, and then we brought it down to $350,000?
I think what I said was, in the current year, and I'll have my trusty sidekick correct me. In the current year, we budgeted $362,000. That's for fiscal year 24. For fiscal year 25, we recommended $1 million.
And to recap, you also said at this meeting that you are comfortable increasing that to $1,087,000?
plus, right, the $87,000 to make up for the reduction in the list. Yes.
And where do you get confidence in that increase? Or how can you make me feel confident in that increase?
Well, I can tell you that for the current year, it's trending towards almost 3.4 million for the fiscal year. You look at 2023, for the year, the revenue received, it was 1,947,000. So, but it's volatile. So you go back the year before that, it's 155,464. A year before that, 93,536. A year before that, 638,415. So I think that I think it's kind of a compromise, because if you look forward into the interest rate environment, it's not going to come down immediately. I'm confident we'll be able to hit those targets pretty comfortably. I wouldn't be confident recommending any higher revenue, and I think that if you went with a lower revenue number, we would have a situation like we had last year, or that we're likely going to have this year, where it contributes to a large positive revenue variance at the end of the year, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, because as a practical matter, the only reason that we have a pavement management program this year is because we had positive revenue variances last year that we were able to put an assignment on and budget as part of this budget. So I wouldn't be comfortable going any further, but I think that at least for the next year or two, that's a pretty prudent estimate. And I'd also ask Tom if he's got any other insight or thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think I could echo a lot of what Brandon said. I think in the current interest rate environment, and you look at recent history, where rates are now and where they're likely to go in the short term, we could be pretty confident with a $1 million budget on that line item for fiscal year 25. But the further away you get from that, the more uncertain the outlook is. And you got to figure that even if it's difficult to time when those rates might come down and when we might see a corresponding decrease in that revenue line item, at some point they will come down, and we don't want to put ourselves in a position where we need to increase the tax levy by a significant amount in a future budget year in order to make up for lost interest revenue. So we kind of looked at the $1,087,911 mark as kind of, as Brandon mentioned, kind of a compromise where it's a target that we should comfortably hit, and it's also a place where in a future year we could find it a little easier to dial it back without putting too much stress on the tax levy.
And Tom's point's a good one, because it cuts both ways. You don't want to dig yourself into a hole so that you've over-relied on this revenue source, and as rates come down, you've got to find some other line item to pick up the slack, which is probably going to have to be the levy. But at the same time, currently, you don't want to overburden the levy when you know that there's a very good likelihood that, you can conservatively generate revenue on that, on that line item. So kind of trying to thread the needle.
Okay. Thank you. So overall, from the budget, I also want to thank all the work that went into it, reemphasize for the public that there are many levels of review that go into our budget review process. It starts with the paid staff on both the Board of Education side and on the municipal side. It's then reviewed by the volunteer boards of education as well as the town council, and then it's also reviewed by us. So there are multiple levels of review and effort that go into this budget. And all of us were involved all along the way in following that budget forward to get comfortable with the numbers. I am comfortable with a 5.44% increase year over year in the total spend based on where inflation is or was. We're well under the inflation number. The economy is roaring. People are spending, they are still spending money in our economy. Our economy is basically very much based on the spend of the American people, and it's still going strong. We are in a community that is relatively wealthy and has a lot of investments, which are all doing relatively well. So the upside is times are good. We're not spending or increasing the budget above inflation. We're under inflation. And so I have a little less concern. I hear what my colleagues are saying about upcoming capital improvements. On the same side, we are going to be seeing some of our capital items or some of our debt coming off the books. We don't have some of the problems that other municipalities have in regards to unfunded pension liabilities. Those are going to be going down or coming off. So I think it's a reasonable spend at this time. I'm open to hear arguments or suggestions from either the board or the council as to where they might take it down. But right now, I'm comfortable with where the spend is at.
Just so I know, for others' information, what's the rate of inflation?
The rate of inflation has been around 8%, and it's going down. The historical, like in the last 12 months.
That's higher than I would have guessed. So you're comparing it to the 5.4% increase?
Correct, the spending increase.
All right, great. Not the tax increase. Okay, thank you.
Right, and can I?
Yes, please. Thanks for asking.
So, I think it's important to look at both the rate of increase of spending, the 5.4, but also recognize that because there is good work in gathering funding from our higher government areas, that our tax increase is only 3.3. And so, being able to spend more money, but asking your populace for not that much, I think is pretty good. And so I'm very comfortable with 3.3. And while I would love to throw out a number and say, hey, can you get it to that? I can't look at the budget and tell you where. And I don't think it's fair to suggest it should come down without saying where you think it should come down. Because then that kind of puts you on the line of saying, well, this part of the school shouldn't get that funding. Maybe we wait a year on repairing a roof at the high school, which sounds like a bad idea, right? So, like everybody, I would like to pay less taxes, but I see nothing but responsibility and the best interests of Avon in this budget. And I don't think anybody here is trying to grab more money for their department so that they can go on a vacation to Barbados or spend irresponsibly. I don't see any of that happening here, and so I want to thank everybody who has put any effort into all of this. It's a lot of work, and I think I'm very proud to be in Avon. I've been a member of the public in municipalities that were not this responsible, and it's just refreshing to see this. So that's what I have to say.
Thank you. Oh.
Thank you all for your work and dedication to Avon. It's appreciated year after year. Brandon, for the grand list, it says 24%. I've talked to a lot of different residents, and the house has increased about an average of 30. So I was wondering how the 24% increases really calculated.
Well, I mean, I can tell you the 24%, that's the residential single-family home. That's just the straight up math from 22 to 23. It's about a 400 million, big numbers. I mean, $400,560,000 change. So year over year, it's 24%.
And is there a particular
Is Carl done? Okay, go ahead.
clarification?
Fine.
Is there a particular day or month that assessment falls on? Because, I mean, real estate has still been going up.
October 1, 23.
So was it October 1 of 23?
Yeah, that's the assessment date.
Okay, yeah.
That's the cutoff date.
So I'm wondering if, like, 30% went to December, because it may have gone up.
Well, it's an average too. So there's some houses that are 20 and some are
houses
40.
20,
Sure,
some are,
yeah.
if you're a condo, you're 41.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point because, like in my office, and Tom's got it, and anybody can look at it, there is we have a book of all of the residential properties by street. And, you can just, it's kind of fascinating to see how the different bands of value are impacted by the market. And this is all about the market. This is, independent forces that we're trying to quantify and track. So, you can look at the houses on Craigmore versus Skyview, for instance, or Carriage versus Arch. And there are some very large differences in terms of the percent changes in those values. Sometimes the percent change, you have to look at both the percent change and then you have to look at the dollar change because, some of those more valuable properties, well, the percent might not change as much, but, dollars do because you're talking about a larger base.
So the grand list is the total of all of them, not just an average based on that change?
It's the total. Right. In that 24% I mentioned is the average across the residential category. All right, I should say it's the increase year over that category.
Right. Your house may have gone up 30% and mine went up 21. And so, or 18, and the average of ours is 24%, and that's the 24%. It's not that yours went up 24% and mine went up 24%. It's the actual house, individually.
Thank you. So just to clarify, because that's great, the number that we have, the grand list total, is not an average number. It's all houses added together.
Total year over year.
Year over year.
Yes.
Okay. So then I would be fine with the 3.3% increase for this time.
Okay, Houston.
Yes.
Do you have something you'd like to say?
Well, no one's ever happy about a revaluation, but that's not our job in the sense that the revaluation is revaluation. We don't reach down and change individual valuations. People have to do that through the appeal process. If they've done it, great. That's why we had to come up with some extra money. If they haven't done it, well, they didn't take advantage of the remedies. So I don't see anything obvious that we should cut. We had, in fact, borrowed against our physical assets by not paving the roads for a long time. Thank goodness we had the ARPA money so we could fix that. So while I would wish the number would be smaller, I think this is the responsible number. Will it hit some people hard? Yes, because their house valuations went up. Will it hit some people very lightly, or will their taxes go down? The short answer is yes. But it's not like we're paving the streets with gold, but we're being responsible to take care of our infrastructure. That's it.
Okay, thank you. I just have one thought about a potential source of revenue, and I wanted to get people's thoughts about this. when we did the assignments on fund balance this year, we put $500,000 into a capital improvement fund that doesn't really have a purpose yet. And that didn't really, it was just sort of like a savings bank from which to grow. And I'm just wondering, based on the number that was thrown out, if we took 250 out of that and put it back into budget, that would bring it down to 3. And I mean, the reason for saying it is that it's not that this is irresponsible in any way, shape, or form. It's that not everyone is doing well, even in a good community, a wealthy community like Avon. And as Diane Hornaday pointed out the other night, there are other programs that are being cut because of the pandemic coming to an end. People are kind of, if we can meet people where they are right now, with just adding a little bit more back for people that are going to have to pay more, the people in the condos, the people who are not going to be able to make their ends meet. Another statistic that I saw was the ALICE number, which is the asset limited, income restrained, employed households. 69% of all households in Connecticut cannot afford basics, including housing, childcare, food, and transportation in the communities and where they live. Maybe that's not in Avon, but there are some people here that have that problem too. So if a little bit will make a difference, I just need to put that out there, because that seemed like something that was, we put it in because we had a $3 million surplus 2 years in a row, and putting some of that money back. And I guess the final point would be, it is not unprecedented to use that amount of money in a reval year. Typically, you would use it because the grand list didn't grow. This year, as the presentation pointed out, the actual growth was smaller than the increase when you adjust for the revaluation. So, just a thought.
Okay. Tom and Brandon, so if we were to take the overall tax increase and bring it down 0.3% to get it to 3, how many dollars is that worth? And what would the real effect of that reduction be on the average homeowner? How much does it really save in their pocketbook?
286. So it's about $289,000. $289,305. That's the reduction that would be required to get to a 3% tax increase. So in terms of the impact on the average homeowner, what do you think we have?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know, would you say a $350,000 net assessment would be average? I'm not sure if that's the average, but on a net assessment of that value, the impact would be about $31.50.
$31.50.
Yeah.
A year.
A year. That's not that much money in a year when you're talking about lattes.
I mean, I would say that as far as the contingency goes, it does have value for the town. I wouldn't have recommended it otherwise. And I can already think of a couple of things that may be percolating out, in the community. We're kind of eyeing that as a potential source of funding to get those capital projects addressed. So that's the value. It gives us a little bit more flexibility. And then as a board, you have to offset that against what you're trying to achieve in terms of, savings for the residents.
Could I follow up on sort of along similar lines to what Kathy had said, Brandon and Tom? Isn't it true that we have a $1.75 million favorable variance in other local revenues through 8 months of this current fiscal year? And on an annualized basis, that equates to roughly $2.6 million of favorable wind at our back for this current year. So I'm not sure from a government accounting perspective, could we not simply take roughly 10% of that, or $260K, round up to make it $289, to bring down the tax increase to that 3% level versus the 3.3% currently?
So you're suggesting like take current year favorable results and apply them to fiscal year 25?
Essentially. I mean, we have an extra $2.6 million in the bank.
Yeah, in practice, we wouldn't take results from a fiscal year that's not already completed and apply the impacts of those results to a future year. Just like the timing of it would be unusual.
So could we not bump up that $87,000 extra increase in interest income by another 289 to make it
Yeah, I mean,
3 and change?
So like could it be done? It could be done. However, some of the points that we made earlier when talking about interest income, the more you increase a revenue source like an interest income or any non-property tax revenue source, you're putting yourself in a position where you're relying more on that source. And so if we were to increase interest income by that level, we would have to consider what that looks like in future fiscal years, in addition to just fiscal year 2025. So when we look at the budget, we want to look at things not just for the year in front of us, but for where we're setting ourselves up in a multi-year budgeting process. And so, as we discussed before, revenue sources like interest income could erode and fluctuate over time, and in the future, we have to anticipate that they will go down. And if we're going to build more into that estimate for our fiscal year 25 budget, we could be setting ourselves up for the future, creating a hole in the budget that needs to be filled by some other revenue source that, in all likelihood, could be property tax revenue. There are other considerations as well. If you look at the current budget, we do have other non-tax levy revenue sources that have increased. I think we're looking at about a $770,000 increase in intergovernmental grants in the general fund. So some of those grant revenue sources are not guaranteed and could evaporate or disappear in future fiscal years. And we need to have some level of maneuverability to be able to handle that without building a sort of drastic increase into our property tax levy, not just for next year, but for future years. And so that's where we have a little bit of hesitance in over relying on that interest income line item and increasing it beyond the $87,911 that Brandon mentioned earlier.
There's another important consideration too, thinking out, I think this would hit the year after next. There's a tax on, there's a cap on car tax. I think it's 32.5?
32.46.
32.46. So we're now, comes in handy. So now we're going to be under that cap, which means we're not going to get the grant from the state. So that's going to hit in fiscal year 26. So that could negatively impact our revenue picture. So
But that's not till next year. That's not till 26 though, right?
That's right, yes. But still, these things, they take years to build and then years to unwind, right? So if you were to over-rely on interest income in 2025, and perhaps you have to dial it back by $500,000 in 2026 at the same time, you may also have to solve for a reduction in an intergovernmental grant in the amount of whatever, $300,000. So it compounds. It's a philosophical decision for the board as to whether or not that's something you want to entertain, bringing the proposed tax increase down. My recommendation is, if that is something you want to do, I would not load it into future revenue. I would make an expenditure reduction. I can only tell you that as far as that capital contingency goes, I don't have a definitive use for it right now, but I guarantee with our capital footprint and our infrastructure, something is going to come up.
Can I ask a quick question on the motor vehicle rate? It's always been different from the real estate rate, though, hasn't it?
No.
No?
No.
It's only because of the cap?
Yeah, the state.
It was always the same? Okay.
The state cap, I think it
wasn't
went into
sure.
effect 2 years ago.
Very good. Thank you.
So I think that Brian made the point, and I alluded to it too. We're still looking at $2.6 million extra, more income than we had budgeted in this one line item. So to say that we can't come up with another $250,000 to bring that down to 3%, seems kind of silly to me, because we're going to have that same end of the year discussion that we had last year that took us several months to get through of what to do with that $3.5 million. And it got put into different places, and we are using some of it for pavement this year. The same thing's going to happen with this $2.6 million. Or $3.4 million, the figure that you gave.
But we're not at the end of the year yet, so.
I understand that, but we already right now realize 1.75 million.
Yeah, but we could go, interest, I agree, it seems unlikely interest rates are about to plummet, but, COVID happened really quickly last time, and things like that happen, which is why we don't project like that. I think, just another point, if we're using the spending increase of, I think it was 5.4%, comparing to, keep in mind that is inflated by year-end transfer, the overage from year-end, and also about $1 billion worth of ARPA funding. So 1.4 million from year-end transfers for the roads. So it is inflated. I tend to agree with Harry. I think inflation is a better target than we are. The past several years, we've been well under inflation. I'm looking at the list of capital projects right now. There's nothing new on here. This is all continuing maintenance. We're not adding anything new this year. The biggest the new thing that's on here is the DPW building upgrades, and those guys drag us out every year to show us what the state of that building, and it's time, but it's existing infrastructure that we need to update. So again, maybe this comes back to the point of like, what is the extra 0.3%? What is cutting that 0.3%, the 3.3 down to 3? Really get you as far as savings as a resident in this town or the taxpayer in this town? It's not much.
$30.
It's not.
That's on the average. It's not the same for everybody.
But when you look at increasing our taxes every single year, and then having surpluses last year and the year before, and I don't know what they were before that, that's a message.
But the surpluses are going toward. So when we came on, we were within probably a year of going to bonds for roads and throwing a ton of money onto the debt service. We're not going to have to do that, it looks like. And it has been the year-end transfers and some positive revenues that supported that. And so my opinion is as long as we spend that responsibly and do it in ways that we reduce future costs, I think that's the most prudent move we can make.
Over the long run.
Over the long run. Again, this is not it's easy to hyper-focus on this year, but yeah, we're looking forward to future generations and the welfare of Avon in the long term. So I know you know where I stand. 3.3% is what I'd like, so I don't get voted in. But again, as far as capital goes, there really isn't anything new on here. The capital reserve fund is an interesting idea. We've had several years where we had a generator come up as $500,000 just like that. So it happens, and it will happen.
When I looked through the capital projects funds, particularly with roads, but I think a lot of the money that we're spending now falls into that same bucket of repair and making up for deferred maintenance. And we've been doing a really good job of that on the town level. And I know that there's a return for that. When we get to the point where we're properly maintaining our roads, I think we will see our road budget go down. But we're at a spot now and have been, $20 million in basically deficit of what we could spend today to fix our roads. And we've got $1.8 million in there, but that's, when we get to that point, we'll see some responsibility back in with the maintenance of our roads, and so long as we don't get into a trend of not maintaining what we have again. And yeah, so I stand at the same spot.
Anybody else?
Just one additional comment. You know, I don't think the capital improvement program this year, it is maintenance for the most part. If you look at the 5-year capital improvement program, it contemplates roughly a $48 million spend over that time period through fiscal year 2028. And as I read it, it does not include many of the items illustrated on page R3. And those are significant large-scale capital projects, such as Old Farms Road, the Avon Volunteer Fire Department facilities, Board of Education Central Office, et cetera, You know, probably a rough estimate, throw in another 25 million to that, give or take, so you're at 75.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair, and I think anyone will tell you, like, the 5-year plans are, there's a lot of dreams.
Got it. So I'm probably more focused on that than I am specifically, the spend this year, 3.3. But I guess if it was 3.6, would you sort of have, or 4.6, would you have the same response? Like, it's, okay, well, we sort of have to do it, and we shouldn't use the wind at our back from favorable variances in the interest income to bring it down. It's just going to keep going up. And I guess, for a reduction or increase to the revenue sources of $289,000 to bring it to a 3% even marker off of a $116 million number is not a huge lift. But I don't sort of care either way, but it might be a nice marker to say 3% flat as opposed to 3.3.
Well, I think another way of looking at it is if we don't do these projects now, those prices are going to go up also. And so deferring it to later, things are going to cost more later as well. And so we're just making that final bill be higher by not taking care of it now.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying defer any projects. I'm just saying we're going to have a favorable variance to the tune of 7 figures in that line item next year. So take 289,000 of that and bring it down to a 3% even tax increase.
Yeah, remember we're 3 months from the end of the fiscal year, so. So we've got most of the results on the interest now. Just one last question before we call for a vote. As far as the concerns that were raised the other night, are we going to look into, and will we have the flexibility to put more money into social services should that need become evident?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes, we know what that issue is.
Okay, good.
Right, we'll be able to solve
They
it.
gave a $25,000 grant, I think.
Right.
Just recently.
We did some ARPA funds.
Yeah, well, no, this is a little different. So what Diane was referring to, we have the senior center offers a senior meal plan. They run it on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The town doesn't pay anything directly for it. It's provided by the community renewal team. It's called CRT, which is a nonprofit 501. They're a conduit for both federal and state funding. They have a whole schedule of services that they provide, but one of them is to provide these meals to senior populations at senior centers. And basically, it's grant funded, and there's a suggested donation by the senior of either $3 or $10.31, depending on age, whether you're above or under 60 years old. So the bottom line is that about 2 weeks ago, this CRT organization sent a letter to the senior centers saying, hey, guess what? We're out of money. And we are going to have to cap the number of meals that we will provide to your seniors. So on Tuesdays and Thursdays, we average about 40 meals a day. And they've said they can only provide 24 meals a day, which means we'd be turning people away, which of course we're not going to do. So we're in the process now of trying to figure that out. But that's separate from this budget process.
Okay. I know. Right. Good, all right, thank you. Margaret? Oh, I'm sorry.
If you guys are going to, I just wanted to, there are 3 things that I usually am concerned about each year. One of them is every 5 years. But the compounding tax increases, the ability to pay that does get brought up in Avon, that average doesn't get spread across households. So anyone listening, it's going to affect people differently. So I always like to acknowledge that. And I have been consistently concerned about this year's reval for certain segments where some people are going to potentially have tax decreases, but others are going to have some large or reval increases, which will then increase their tax beyond what you guys choose as 3.3 versus 3.0. So I hope you don't mind. I'm just going to say I don't mind if we caucus again as a town council, if there's any way to reduce this, least worst recommendation with advice from our experts over here. I agree, I don't want a cliff. That has happened before in the budget process from year over year to year. But I would, just in general for the town, prefer it to be closer to 3, and I'm willing to have a caucus if that helps between Board of Ed and Town Council. But I just wanted to throw that out there.
Someone wants to speak, go ahead.
I just want to take an opportunity to represent the Board of Ed.
Sure, please.
Clearly, we're all stewards of the town budget as a whole of 3 boards, and we all put a lot of time into this, and I value all of you for participating as much as we're participating. Obviously, we represent the Board of Ed, and that's who we have to be stewards of. We never come to any of these presentations slightly disrespectful of where people are coming from, and I know you know that, but I just feel like I need to say that. We are very mindful of trying to keep the number as low as possible because we ourselves are taxpayers too, and we want to be reasonable. As a Board of Ed district, we have legal obligations that put us in a position where we can't budge on certain increases, and we already were above what we normally would want to bring to 2.94 or 2. Is that correct? For special education and for other obligations that we have, we can't budge on that. Say that again. 2.84.
Right.
So we start with that, and we don't have really a cushion for anything else. And this wasn't even like a fun budget. We're very proud of what we spoke to, to say the things that our students are accomplishing. We're very lucky to have that amongst the town and parents that are involved enough that encourage that in their students. But we're really scraping to keep what we already have, so that people will continue to come to town because they see the effort and the work and the standard that we have set. So I just want to be clear that we have the discussion before ever coming to you. If we had to cut, where would we take that from? It's people. There's nothing we could eliminate from our budget that wouldn't impact staff. So that means existing staff. You saw we're splitting a social worker between 2 elementary schools. So we're not giving the students something grand here. So I just want to be mindful of that if, as much as I know round numbers are great and they're preferable, if it's really only $31 per person to keep the budgets that we've presented, I just hope you'll consider that.
Kathy, may I ask a question?
Sure.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Brandon or Tom, but the revenues are not set still at this point. Really, I'm just asking that because part of the conversation I think is about thinking about where we might land in terms of revenues and shaving away from that, so to speak. But governor's budget is not done. We don't know what we're getting for excess costs yet, and so forth. So, and that will still be at least a month, right? Before we have
it's
some
a short session, you would hope.
So in other words, just to make sure everyone understands your question, there could be additional mandates, or there could be, when you say excess costs?
Excess costs, for example, on special education, we don't know where we're going to land on what we get back from what we've put out. We had
this is part of the conversation we had with our state reps and senator related to reimbursement for expenses in the school district. I know on our end, at least, I don't think the revenues are set on the town's end either until the governor's budget is finalized. But I know for certain on our end that we aren't sure even what will come into us for the year that we're in yet, and projecting forward revenues for next year. Right now, it actually looks like excess cost, for example, will come in short, which was not what they told us 4 or 5 months ago.
And the Hartford special ed tuition, which I know Tom updates you on, that's only an estimate. And we won't even bill Hartford till the end of the fiscal year, so that'll be a June billing to Hartford that will be paid as a receivable later in July or August. So that number is the biggest revenue number for us other than our federal and state grants. And that very well could be lower than what we have or higher. We just don't know.
That's also why there's a supplemental appropriation that happens later in the spring for us.
Yeah, I know. I recall that. Yeah.
All right. Yes.
So in other words, if you don't get what you're expecting, you're going to take a hit, is what you're...
Well, there's 2 different pieces. For the open choice supplemental appropriation, that's something we come to you for spending for that grant. But the actual special education cost to the town of Hartford, to city of Hartford that we bill for, that is budgeted as part of the revenue process. It's a revenue on your books, the Board of Finance town's books. And that is always, it's a variable number that we do our very best to try to budget appropriately for. But until the services are delivered throughout the year, I don't have a final number. So in terms of if you're looking at revenues year to date, that could very well change. Right now what Tom has is an estimate based on our quarterly billing billing to them.
Okay. Right. In other words, the revenue budget for the current year is very much it's a work in progress. And if you don't hit those revenue targets, then it has to be made up. It has to be made up by these overages in investment income, for instance, and things like that. So to try to apply revenue, in this world, to apply revenue, from a current fiscal year and budget it for the following year before that prior fiscal year is closed.
That's what I would ask.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. That's helpful. Okay. Anthony.
Yeah. Hey, Brandon, I'm going to ask some of my questions. Just help me to understand this a little bit. I 100% get the idea that projecting interest income in the future is a bad idea because if we start to rely on that source, and it is a variable source that fluctuates, and we're trying to budget for that, and all of a sudden we increase it to $1 million or even $1 million plus, then we're stepping into dangerous territory, and things can happen, and it can drop, and then we're in some deep doo-doo. And you can look around to other towns who have gone down that route and you kind of see what happens to them, and they have those cliffs, and then it's a real problem. Brandon, do you try to, with the projection of income and grant list growth, do you try to smooth out those cliffs for the town? I mean, I don't know. I would like to think that in the accounting business, when you're projecting out, you said it takes years to wind up and years to wind down some of these accounts. Are you trying to smooth it almost?
We don't really.
I think philosophically we tend to try to put ourselves in a position where we don't build those sorts of cliffs into the future.
Right.
And so as a result, it allows us to maintain some stability with respect to how we're going to change the tax levy on a year-to-year basis.
Right.
Despite the fact that we have some volatile revenue sources that theoretically could be much higher than what we budgeted in 1 or 2 particular years. But we try to keep in mind the fact that what goes up must come down, and make sure that we're not building a sort of cliff that needs to be filled later on.
Yeah, like a good way to think about it, it's like an EKG, right? It's in what you're always looking for is you're looking for peaks and valleys. You're looking for aberrations, right? Medical people.
I was going to say, Carl understands.
So, like if you think about a couple of years ago where we had the building permit revenue for the Avon Village Center project, Well, I mean, that was like hundreds of thousands of dollars. That really distorted that line item. So, that was an example where, no, we didn't build it in. In fact, we took it out. We put it aside and we used it for something else. So it's like if you lean towards, and again, it's a balance because you don't want to overburden the levy, right? You don't want to do that, but at the same time, you don't want to take that big slug of, unassigned fund balance, offset a budget for a year, and then the next year, well, okay, what do we do? We can do some things, but, you got to go back to the levy to fill it in.
Right.
So I guess to that extent, if you think about it, like thinking ahead and trying to avoid peaks and valleys, and we do look at it on an average.
Right.
Whenever we budget for, snow removal operations, for overtime, we look at that as a 5-year rolling average. When we look at building permit revenue, we look at that as a 10-year rolling average, trying to pull out those big projects that we knew spiked in.
Right. And so to just to the concerns that Board of Finance and I hear us on the town council have as well is trying to keep it to a certain percentage. And we say, well, things are, it's going to increase. Yes, it is going to increase. And that is what happens in a capitalist system. It increases. And so if we fight that increase every single year, we then end up with that EKG, and I don't want to confuse the medical references because flatlining is no good, but I would love to have flatlining in government spending. Sure, we all would. But if we look back historically, going back, the year 2000 doesn't seem that long ago, but that's over 2 decades ago. And you can see those spikes that happen every couple of years. You see the percentage increase jump up to, oh, geez, I'll just pick out some numbers in here. The mill rate increased 7%, 5%. There's some more 5%. They're way up there, historically speaking. And same combined spending increasing. I see 11% here, 6%, 5%, 5%, 7%, 6%. It's always way up there. The past number of years that we have been working with Brandon and some members of the current Board of Finance, we've tried to keep it relatively flatline. We've attempted to. And I would say if ever we got to a point where we have spiked to 2002's 11%, but then again, it came down to 6.8%, and then it passed. So I would hope that if we ever got to a spike where we had 6 or 8%, we would be looking at ourselves and saying, what the hell are we doing? Because we didn't manage this properly. I do think in sitting through the months of process that we went through and looking at this budget and seeing what we could cut or could not cut, I don't see a lot that we could cut on the spending side. However, we do have a piggy bank. But when we withdraw from that piggy bank, we got to put back into it. And so, but we also sometimes have little side piggy banks that we like to have for projects that we do need. And sometimes if we dip into those little piggy banks that we have off to the side to not be able to pay ourselves or decrease our monthly bill a little bit because I dig into that piggy bank that I was saving for that thing that's going to happen in the future. Then all of a sudden when that thing in the future has to happen, it costs more because I wasn't able to save enough for it. So I'd like to dig into that little tiny $500,000 savings bank and maybe offset it with savings that we have, to speak. But we would then have to replace that when we would go to use that in the future. I understand 3% as a number, but it's also just like 3.3%. I've been on a fixed income as a teacher. My year to year over, I'm grateful to have made a living off of teaching. My percentage increase is about 2%. So, I'm voting for something that hurts me badly, but it's the right thing to do for this town. So that's just my point. That's why I voted yes when it was on the town council side. So anyway, just a thought or two.
Okay.
We can continue to the real good financial talk now. Go ahead.
All right. I guess we're at the point where we need to ask for a motion. Is there any sort of a motion to put the piggy bank money in to offset the tax increase.
I'll make the motion to put the piggy bank money in to offset the increase.
Can we have that motion a little more,
A little more.
a little less?
So I would like to make a motion.
Please make a motion. I was.
That we
someone else would make.
use either our interest income or some reserves to bring it down to the increase down to 3%.
So that would be 289,000? All right.
I'm
Okay.
confused. Are we talking interest income revenue, or are we talking the use of that capital reserve?
I would like to clarify the motion, Kathleen.
Is it the interest income that we're looking at?
Mechanically, I don't think you'd be able to use a revenue source for the previous fiscal year at this time.
Okay.
If you wanted to effectively do that, you'd have to propose use of unassigned fund balance and then presume that we reimburse it when all is said and done. Again, that would be advisable on our end.
What I thought it was you were looking to increase the interest income revenue budget.
Yes.
For fiscal year 25 by X. Or, rather than doing that, using that same amount that is in our capital reserve that was created as part of the closing entries
Last
for
year's
last
closing,
year.
yes.
Okay.
Would it be better to just pick a percentage, though, a mill rate percentage, and then let us figure it out afterwards with a combination of expenditure reduction?
I was just replying to, Micah's point
We're
of
not asking for expenditure
picking.
reduction, are we? We're not asking for expenditure reduction.
Right. I mean, that's.
We're asking for recognition of money that came in. Last year is coming in this year again, well over what's budgeted.
No, we can't do that. We can't do it in the current year.
Yeah, so you either have to take it from fund balance or the piggy bank, but that's assigned. You'd still have to be fund balance?
No, I wouldn't do that. I would recommend, if that's what you want to do.
I'm asking your recommendation.
I would recommend that you increase the interest income line item in the revenue budget for fiscal year 25.
Okay, and that can be done.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if this is what you want to do, I would recommend using the capital contingency rather than increasing the revenue budget. I'd rather have you use money that you've got rather than a revenue estimate.
Okay. So when you say, so then you would take it out of the capital budget?
Capital contingency.
Okay, all right. Does that motion make sense to people?
Just for clarity.
Is there a second to the motion?
No, I was just trying to make sure we understood what the motion was before we asked for a second.
That sure doesn't.
Just like Dan mentioned, it's easier for us to hear a number that you approve versus telling us how to spend it. Because I think that's where it lands on our shoulders, is we have to decide how that money is allocated or taken from. So
The current is on the revenue side, so the spend is not being reduced.
Right.
That's your preference. And I'm not saying that wouldn't be the way we might, if you reduce our number, have to go. But that still lands on our shoulders as to how the money gets allocated.
That was the way they're making the current motion. If they.
I know.
I
But
know,
that's
yeah.
like not traditional use of Board of Finance.
Point taken. Do we have a second?
What is the motion?
The motion is to increase the interest revenue
Use capital.
estimate. What?
Didn't Brandon recommend use capital reserve now,
He said.
rather than the interest income?
I should probably defer to council. Yes.
Rather than do the
bumping up a
revenue.
revenue,
All right.
use existing funds.
All right, so we said it different ways. All right, so it would be whether to take $289,000 from the capital reserve to offset the current year tax increase, to lower it to 3.
Yes.
All right,
What do we currently have in the
what's the
capital
balance?
reserve?
it's
the
500.
500,000 was added to
Yeah.
Right.
the fund balance assignment for a capital reserve.
So of 500, they want to take 289,000.
approximately.
That's correct.
Just so that everybody's, just want to be really clear.
Right, all right, so, I mean, there's two.
For the purposes of reducing an average $31.
I'm interested
Just
in,
make the motion to
Right.
be 3% increase.
all right, just make the
and
motion
figure
that it be
out.
reduced to 3%, then, that the tax
I
increase
make
be
the motion to
3%.
reduce the increase to 3%.
Second.
Okay. Call for a vote. Do you have them, did you hear the motion?
Discussion.
Oh, I'm sorry, discussion, please.
I think that's a mistake. I don't feel like as a member of the Board of Finance, I know more than all of the work that went into these budgets, particularly from town council, our town manager, finance director, and everybody at the at our education system, the Board of Education, and our staff there. I don't think it's a mistake to keep $500,000 on the side. To your point, Anthony, we're going to have to put it back later, and so borrowing from this year so that we could meet a 3% instead of the recommended 3.3%. I think is I think it's a mistake, and I think it's not that significant that it needs to. I don't know really what the purpose of all of that is, to remove $298,000 against the recommendations of all of these professionals on a budget that's over $100 million. Like that, what percentage is that? 0.03%? It seems foolhardy to go against those who have recommended this. So since this is going to come up for a vote, I would encourage the members of the Board of Finance to vote no. And after that vote, I'll move to have the tax increase be at the recommended number of 3.3%.
Any other comments?
I can second Micah on sticking with the 3.3%. I would vote no. I have not heard enough arguments that would strongly suggest lowering it to 3%. I think if there was a reason of anything to make a divot in helping individuals within Avon, a full percent decrease would then be warranted. But a 0.3% is not a lot. We're pinching pennies for no reason here.
So I realized a few moments ago that I'm sitting at this table, and this is the 16th budget that I've dealt with. I've passed 10 Board of Education budgets sitting on a school board, and I've passed 5 municipal budgets, which include the school board. This is my Sweet 16 party tonight. But I've done that in 2 communities. This is my 3rd community doing it, and I've seen good things happen in communities, and I've seen bad things happen in communities. I've seen trying to hit a number like 3% or somewhere between 2 and 3%. Because honestly, when you run a municipal budget, we are not-for-profit organizations. We are delivering services to the communities that we live in. And to think that cutting those budgets improves the quality of life in a community is foolhardy. Everything goes up. Controlling it, trying to control it between 2 and 3% every year is a good place to be, as opposed to 0, 0s. One community I lived in, there were 4 straight years of 0. and the town got hammered in that 5th year. Absolutely hammered. Roads go to hell. Schools lose accreditations. It can just be devastating to a community. So leveling off those spikes is really important to me. To get to a 3% now, in the situation that we're in Avon, and by the way, we're in a really good place in Avon. We are not in bad situations with unfunded pensions of other communities. We have low debt. We're AAA bonded. When times are good, that's when you invest in your communities. And when times are bad, that's when you pull back. To get to a 3% number now, for the sake of getting to a 3% number, to bring it down $289,000, to bring it down to $2.50 a month, seems like the wrong thing to do. And what I don't want it to encourage, I know we're talking about surpluses that we're having at the end of the year that we're trying to do something with. I hear that, but I want to be sure that we're also not, by playing a shell game, that we're not encouraging people to do bad things, because I've seen that happen in communities too. I've seen Board of Educations spend the money all the way to the end because they didn't want to give a surplus back to the town council. And that was bad. That was bad for the relationships between town and gown. It was terrible. I see this community in the last couple of years responsibly spending, returning whatever they have left back to the council, and the council allocating it, and the manager allocating it to appropriate spends. We want to encourage that, and I get concerned that if we're playing a shell game to get to 3%, for the sake of being at 3%, we're going to create bad behavior. We're going to create people spending their budgets because they have that budget, and they don't want to not get it the following year. So for this nominal amount of money, I'm sticking with the budget with where it stands right now. I didn't hear a lot from the community. We heard from 2 people, maybe 3 issues, which we've addressed to say that we can cover. I don't think it would be a prudent decision to cut lower than where we are right now. So I will be voting against the amendment.
Okay. All right. So Houston, have you heard everyone sort of commenting and voting at the same time? So.
Yes, and I agree with the comments regarding preserving the budget as presented, so I will vote against the motion.
Okay. I'm persuaded by my colleagues at this point that it's maybe too penny pinching. I'd like to have the discussion. We could have tried to go for more than, could have made it a full % for some people. I mean, I'm troubled by the fact that it doesn't fall equally on everyone and that people have different circumstances going on, but we don't have a good approach for doing that because it's not really our job to come up with the money to reduce things. So I'm going to vote with my colleagues, vote against it, and Kathleen and Brian are voting in favor.
We're voting in favor of the motion.
We'll call the vote when we're done with discussion.
Right, well, we're done with discussion, so yes, call the vote.
Question.
Call the question.
I've got one more thing that I'd like to throw in there, and if I can remember what it was.
We have 10 minutes before they throw us out, so.
Shoot, where was I?
That's right. Like I said, do you have a question?
No.
No, I'll just let it go. Oh, yeah, it is important to me. It's important to Kathleen. It's important to me. We are condominium owners. We are getting slammed by the revaluation. I am very concerned about condominium owners and their values, because the condominiums that we're in now are just approaching what they sold for 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. And these owners are going to get slammed with very large increases. And while you can sort of balance that by saying, well, when you lost all that value in your property, you weren't paying as much in taxes, but in 1 year to take a 40% hit, it's significant. And I don't know how we attempt to fix that, because my concern is that that is going to drive those values back into the toilet, because people are going to see how much the taxes are in the condominiums, and then they're not going to be as favorable as they were previously. I don't know how we can fix that. I don't know how we can provide maybe more services to the condominiums that helps them offset sort of their budgets, whether that be in road service or in cleaning the sewer systems,
Right.
or, well, you don't have garbage for the whole town.
Right, but also, or
Is it a
offsetting.
demand problem where when we have more affordable housing that gets built in town, then the demand will still be there, but we'll have more surplus? And so maybe that will help out as the years go by?
It
I don't
helps
know.
out in the year that it comes online, and after that, it doesn't help out. It smooths the spend out. But
And the market value is based on the fact that the demand is so high. Now,
Right.
the inventory is so low, so.
But condominiums also usually have more senior people living in them, which is less of a drain on the entire town. So we want to encourage that housing and be
All right,
careful.
well, we're going to put a bookmark on that discussion. It's a good discussion to have.
That was my concern too.
All right, so call the question on the motion. All those in favor? All those opposed?
Opposed.
Okay. Opposed have it. Is there a motion to approve the budget as proposed?
So moved.
As
You can second,
proposed.
Houston.
All right, I second.
All right.
Discussion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Abstain, anybody? That's everybody. All right, thanks, everybody. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
We are adjourned.